The first major project I ever worked on in the survival world was my TNT mob farm. This build has gone through lots of changes over time and has always been there to supply me with gunpowder and string when I need it. However, I'm moving into a phase of this survival world where my projects are getting bigger and more complicated. To put it simply, I've outgrown this creeper farm, and as much as it pains me to say it, it's time to move on to something better. After some careful consideration, I chose this gulf as the new location for the farm. As you probably know, mobs don't spawn in mushroom biomes, meaning the area surrounding this gulf is already mob-proofed and it doesn't need the caves to be lit up. I start by creating a stone box around the outline that I laid out. These stone walls are 101 blocks long and will be the basic foundation of the farm structure. They look plain now, but of course these walls will be thoroughly decorated by the end of this video. The next phase of this build is going to be a long, arduous process because I will be removing 50% of the water that's inside this box. By my rough calculations, that means I'll have to remove at least 150,000 water blocks. I already had a small stash of sponges in my ender chest, but I wanted to gather a few more before I started draining. There's only one way to get sponges in Minecraft, and that's by raiding ocean monuments. My strategy for ocean monuments is pretty straightforward. Step 1 is to kill the ender guardians that give you mining fatigue. I skip the maze by just blowing my way directly to the guardians. If you didn't know already, you can actually detonate TNT underwater if you place a piece of sand on top before lighting it. Once all 3 Elder Guardians are dead, I swim around looking for sponge rooms. I don't have easy access to water breathing potions, so I decided to just bring doors with me to create air pockets when I need them. I flew around to a few different monuments and repeated this process until I had an adequate amount of sponges. Now that my small stash of sponges has been expanded, it's time to start draining. I start by using gravel to divide the water into smaller sections that are about 4 to 5 blocks wide. I used gravel because it's a gravity affected block and in turn will be a lot easier to clean up when I'm done. I'll keep swimming back and forth and placing sponges until I run out, then I recollect them and dry them out by placing them in the nether. With all the water removed, I still need a bit more space to fit the creeper farm in this area, so I set up a haze 2 beacon and started digging. Now that all of the water and land is out of my way, it means it's time to start building the creeper farm. I start by laying out the spawning platforms. I went with a series of diamond-shaped platforms with dispensers in the very center. Later on, these dispensers will be used to flush mobs off the platforms using water. On top of each platform, I put a layer of spruce trapdoors in order to restrict mob spawning. The trapdoors make it so only creepers and spiders can spawn in this farm. I have other means of collecting bone meal, and rotten flesh doesn't have much value anyway, so this farm will only produce the most valuable mob drops: string and gunpowder. Also on each platform, I placed an observer that powers downward. This will make it so that if one dispenser is activated, a chain reaction will activate every other dispenser below it. This will be beneficial when I set up the wiring later on. In order to control how often the water is dispensed, I set up an etho hopper clock. I hooked up the clock to the top layer of dispensers. Like I mentioned earlier, this will trigger a chain reaction that causes every dispenser in that column to activate. That's the creeper farm completed, but I still need a collection system to pick up and transport the items. For an area this large, the best and really only option for item collection is hopper minecarts. I start by placing a layer of stone bricks so I have a flat surface to place the rails. I left a block of air in between the brick and the ground so that I'd have some room to add levers later on. I added the power rails on first. Crafting the rails used up more of my gold than I was expecting, so I had to do a short AFK session at my gold farm, but eventually I was able to craft and place all of the powered rails required to make this collection system possible. And like I mentioned earlier, I placed levers underneath each section of rails to power them. Once that was done, I connected each individual section of powered rails with regular rails. This saved me some gold and redstone in the long run. On top of the rails, I need to add a layer of blocks for the mobs to fall and die on. I decided to use magma blocks, and my reasoning was to kill the mobs that survived the drop because they spawned with armor. About halfway through placing them, I realized that since this is a creeper and spider only farm, the magma was completely unnecessary. But I'd already collected the magma, so I finished placing it anyway. Kind of a waste, but oh well. And just like that, all the functional parts of this build are complete. That means it's time to start working on the aesthetics. Like I mentioned earlier, I'm calling this build Creeper Garden, so the blocks I use for decoration are mostly going to be nature-based. As such, I used grass blocks as the floor for this build. The rest of the decoration will be sitting on top of this grass layer. Speaking of, it's time for me to explain my plan a little bit. I want to cover the entirety of this grass platform in a large hedge maze. The maze will lead to the very center of the area where a beautiful creeper-themed centerpiece will sit. Prior to starting this survival project, I made several different prototypes of Creeper Garden. One of the things I learned during that process was that azalea leaves looked the best in the hedge maze. The only problem was that I don't have a single azalea leaf to my name. That means I've got a lot of resource collection ahead of me. Before I started collecting leaves, I went back to one of my prototypes to see exactly how many stacks I would need to shear. The answer was a resounding 459. For reference, that's equivalent to 17 shulker boxes. That was way more leaves than I was expecting, but also not so much that it was implausible. So I got some shears and a Silk Touch netherite hoe, and I got to work. As an extra benefit of collecting all these azalea leaves, I also ended up with a bunch of oak wood that I can use for later projects, although I also ended up with an obscene amount of flowering azalea, which I have no idea what to do with. After a seemingly endless leaf mining session, I can finally start working on the maze. At this point, I've collected all of the resources I need for the rest of this project, so from here on out, it's all building. I start by making a small doorway in the center of each side as the entrance to the maze. I'll connect these doorways with a decorative trim that will border the entire build. I went with this simple stone brick stair design with small pillars in the corners. On the first pass, I only placed one layer of leaves. I did this so I could work on the general shape of the maze first. I can come back through and make it taller later on. Also, the design of the maze is purely decorative, so it's probably not a very difficult maze and there are several ways to get through it. Once I was happy with the shape, I started making the maze taller. In total, the maze will be 6 blocks tall, with walls that are 2 blocks thick. This is why I needed to spend so much time mining leaves, but in the end, I loved how it turned out and it was all worth it. The next component of this build is the centerpiece that the maze leads to. I knew I wanted to build a statue, and since the redstone component of this project is a creeper farm, a creeper statue just felt right. However, I wanted to make my statue a bit more unique, so I made a few tweaks. First, I used a plethora of different blocks to make the statue look like it's crumbling. Second, I added wings to the creeper. I was iffy about the wing idea at first, but I think they were actually a really good addition that became a signature piece of this build. On top of that, the very tip of the left wing is perfectly positioned as an AFK spot for the creeper farm. Once the statue was in, the build really started to feel complete. However, it's not quite done yet. I still have these plain stone walls that I made at the beginning of the video, and they need some work. I wanted to keep the design simple, so I stuck to stone and stone brick as the main block palette and used deep slate as an accent. I made creeper face tiles to tie in the creeper theme of the build. In between the tiles, I added a few diagonal lines out of stairs and filled in the gaps with vertical pillars. Once I was happy with the design, I repeated it 3 more times, making all 4 sides of this build identical. And just like that, the build is complete. Well, I still need to add a proper storage room for all the mob drops, but for the sake of this video, it's complete. At the beginning of this video, I set 2 goals that I wanted Creeper Garden to fulfill. I wanted the farm to look better, and to produce more items than the TNT mob farm. After some reflection, I think those goals were met. I love how the farm's decoration turned out, and the creeper farm inside is certainly more productive. Overall, I'm happy to have built this in my world. Thank you for watching this video until the end. I hope you enjoyed it. If you like this kind of content and want to help my videos reach more people, you can subscribe, comment, or like the video below. Thanks again for watching. It's time for me to start planning my next project.